Change doesn't happen where people just open the doors. You kind of have to kick them down.
It wasn't that long ago in this country that who you loved could get you arrested. That being gay could cost you your job, your reputation, your safety, and in many cases, your future.
So aware that it was a secret. At some of those parties, it wasn't casual at all. We were highly aware of the risk.
Today, you're going to meet Betty Baxter, an elite athlete, an Olympic captain, a pioneering coach, a woman who gave so much to Canadian sport and that had so much taken from her because she was different from the people who held the power to judge. And as you listen to her story, I want you to imagine being her. 29 years old, you've already represented your country. You've broken ground as one of the rare women coaching at an international level. Your athletes trust you. Your program is working. Your future should be so bright and bold. But instead, on a cold November night in 1981, you're told to drive to a roadside motel between Ottawa and Montreal. Not an office, not a boardroom, a motel room. You walk in and there's 3 men waiting, 3 of the most powerful men in your sport, and they don't greet you with the respect you deserve. They don't ask you about your athletes, your results, or your vision for Canadian volleyball. They ask one question.
There are rumors that you were gay. Do you deny that?
Betty's answer is stunning in its courage.
I am the same person I have always been.
Think about that line. The same person, the same athlete, the same captain, the same coach, the same leader, the same Canadian. And yet, in that moment, everything she had earned was suddenly put on trial.
My eyes widened. I slowly let my breath go.
One of the men stood up and punched the wall so hard the plaster cracked, and he said,
"You never would have been given this job if I'd known that."
Betty walked out of that motel room with her dignity intact. Soon after, she was pushed out of the sport she loved. It's a story of what happens when someone is pushed beyond what should ever be asked of them, but somehow turns that pain into purpose. Because Betty became an activist, a human rights advocate, a builder of community, a champion for women in coaching, for fairness in sport, and for every person who has ever been told they do not belong.
Now they want to talk politics, and they want to talk equal rights. They want to talk about opportunities, things that have never been on their agenda before. I'm having more people who've known me for decades want to have a conversation.
As Betty says, being fired and thrown out of sport was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Because I learned about human rights and how collective action can make a difference in people's workplaces, their lives, their communities. And I learned the power of community.
And she also reminds us that sport can offer tremendous good, especially for girls and women, because it helps them find power and authority in their bodies, a sense of self they may not find anywhere else. But only if sport is safe, only if power is accountable, only if coaches serve athletes instead of controlling them. And near the end of the conversation, Betty shares a line from poet Adrienne Rich that has stayed with her.
The most affirming thing that can happen to you is to be pushed beyond your limits so that you learn that you can go beyond your limits.
This is Betty Baxter's story.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
You know, Betty, when I read those words and now when I hear your words, I just feel so embarrassed about the human race. The fact that they would bring you into a motel room, I see them as 3 cowards trying to find strength with each other and challenge your abilities and your capabilities for all you've done for Canada and for volleyball. And that's what I really want to talk about today, because I think that the more we take these situations personally, the better our chance of erasing these awful biases and prejudices that sadly roar through the human race. Just so people understand who Betty Baxter is, you're one of our best athletes. Tell us a little bit about your volleyball career before that moment where you were virtually dragged into that motel room.
I mean, that's really what the first half of the book is about, Tony. It talks about being a kid in southeastern Alberta and not really knowing even what a big city looked like, being a 17-year-old who turns 18 the first week in Vancouver. And basically I was thrown into an elite world of volleyball, but I had talent. But what I had more than anything else was the willingness to learn and the ability to work harder than anyone would think possible. I was successful remarkably. From my first tryout, I didn't make the high school team when I made it, and I was cut from the national team several times on my way up. I moved to Vancouver. That was 1970. In 1974, I was named the University Athlete of the Year. So I went from nobody to being recognized for being a top player in the country. And then the Olympic Games, one of the things we learned traveling and competing so much when I was 19, 20, 21 was that sport isn't fair. You don't control your agenda. Athletes have very, very little personal agency. When we could sneak away and do something slightly illicit, you're a widget in a system. And Canada's system didn't have much structure, so they were winging it.
Let's go back to the early days in Vancouver. Did you have to navigate that yourself?
Come on, world, throw whatever you want at me. I'm ready for it. I took the advice of the older athletes, got onto a very good senior team where I was kind of a mid-level player, playing in a system with a very harsh coach who was known for his, mistreatment and abusive language. But the athletes told me only the club coaches made the national team. The university was way too low a level. And it's one of the things that I'm trying to make a point to tell people, if your child is playing sports and they're not happy, don't be afraid to take them down a level. Like remove them from the top team and put them at the level where they can experience success. Because I'm happy to disclose, I was with that team for 2 years. It was the national championship team. They trained hard 3 times a week and were far better than any university team. And most national team athletes came from a couple of club teams in Canada. But I left, was in conflict with them. I left and went to the University of British Columbia. And I never would have been a top international athlete had I not done that. At University of BC, they loved having me. They asked me to run the drills, to up the level of the team. I was a team leader. So I had a much better experience because I could be me.
And how has sports changed since back then? Are athletes still a widget without agency in the sense that so much of their destiny is a matter of chance, not choice?
I would say it's changed very little. I think where you see change, and I haven't been intimately involved for 20 years, so I could be corrected, but I've read a good chunk of the Sport Commission report, federal government's position on the Commission on the State of Sport, and it echoes most of what my experience is, and that's in part why I wrote this book as fast as I could, because I wanted people to know that the stories that they were hearing at the Commission are the same stories for the last 50 years. The athletes that were experiencing abuse testifying for the Commission talked about body shaming, no respect for the athlete, and the power with completely unchecked authority of a coach. As examples, in that same time, I read about 2 national bobsled members going to Salt Lake City for the Olympic trials. They're representing Canada, trying to make the time to make the Olympic team. One had just put $10,000 on her credit card to pay for new blades because she knew she wouldn't make time if she didn't have new sled blades. And the other was sleeping in a church basement in Salt Lake City because she couldn't afford a hotel. Those are athletes. That was in 1984. Athletes representing Canada. Maybe they got training and technical program support. I don't know that. But the fact that they didn't have enough money to pay for their equipment or have accommodations says everything about how chaotic sport is.
You're leaving your small town and moving into Vancouver. Your sexuality, how did you come to terms with that? Was it more open? Were you feeling more free that you were?
I didn't have a clue about my sexuality. I was going steady with the guy that was on the basketball team, and I was in the volleyball team. But all I knew is, my family or friend would say, "Oh, he's a good guy. Hang on to him." And I was like, "Are you kidding? I got the world to conquer." Like, I was ambitious to go and be a good athlete or to play internationally. I wanted to be in the Olympics. So I didn't even know what gay was. In Brooks, we weren't in any kind of community that gave me any exposure. So mostly in Vancouver, I was lonely. I started to watch the athletes, like the other female athletes, and the ones I wanted to hang out with, they came and watched people shooting hoops. And if they were in their own sweats, they looked kind of casual. And if they were in their street clothes, they wore jean jackets and cowboy boots. And I thought, those are my people. So I kind of gravitated towards, in those days, nobody called themselves lesbians, but there was a kind of a secret gay crowd. And it was dangerous if anybody knew you were gay. I mean, not a hope would you make a varsity team. Not a hope would you have any kind of opportunities. So, when I first was invited to a gay party, I talk about this in the book, it was like a secret. And I was both thrilled to be invited, but also so aware that it was a secret. At some of those parties, people with teaching jobs or university jobs, there was a knock on the door. They dove for the basement and shut the basement door to hide until somebody told them who was at the door. Like, it wasn't casual at all. We were highly aware of the risk.
So let's talk about the knock on the door. Let's talk about the night in the motel. I mean, you're a very successful coach. Your players love you. You've got ambition. You've got a desire. You've learned from the chaos of how Canada put together sports in the early days. Just the fact that they would call you to a motel. Do you think that was intimidation, or were they just didn't want to have that meeting happen where other people would be witness?
I've never given very much thought why they did it. It was very clear to me that some point over that summer, I became toxic to them because how I was treated by the staff at CVA, by people who had been so enthusiastic about, helping me improve and offering me opportunities. Suddenly I was toxic. And that's why it was so kind of mind messing. There was no accusation. There was no clarity. There was two different men told me, the one said, there's rumors about you being gay. And I couldn't figure out if he was telling me that to check out my reaction or telling me that out of genuine concern. So I didn't know kind of what side he was on. That was my first heads up. But after that, I encountered a guy on the street and I literally stopped him. He'd been an assistant coach when I was a player and he was a college coach or university coach. And I said, have you heard any rumors? He said, yeah, and I have. And he was clearly uncomfortable. He kind of backed away from me. And he said, but they've made good points. And I was like, such as? And he said, well, what parent's going to send their daughter to a program led by a lesbian? I'd already reported male coaches that were sexually assaulting athletes before. I'd have reported that on my way up in coaching. And so I challenged him. I said, you know that I'm not a coach that abuses, and you know who the ones are. In some ways, in the Times in 1982, I'm not surprised that they wanted to keep what they were doing secret. I'm surprised they were that cowardly. And so many people have asked me why I didn't name them in the book. Well, to be honest, Tony, that could have been 3 out of several hundred men who were leaders in sport in Canada. It could have been any one of a dozen sports because it was considered you comply, you dress properly, you pay attention to your superiors, you listen to your coach, or you're out of here. And that's how sport works. There's a ski racer in the 90s whose name was Alison Forsyth. Fabulous Canadian athlete on the ski team. She and 9 other ski athletes finally had their coach convicted of sexual assault. He spent, I think it was 7 or 8 years out of his sentence of 12 in jail and was just released a year ago. She has been running a hotline for athletes experiencing abuse out of her home personally for years because there's no place for athletes to report that. She said that coach used to fine them, like money, fine them if they were seen in public in unfeminine clothing. These are Canada's top ski racers, treated like sex slaves by their coach. I think the sexual violence may be an anomaly in some cases, but it would be hard to find sports where it's never happened.
Why do you think that is? Is it the culture of winning above all? Is it this sense of power because you've been appointed the emperor of the team as the coach?
I think it's the power. We had a Korean coach, and I'm grateful. I mean, he was horrifically difficult in terms of physical training, but I was grateful that he left us alone. He didn't care about our personal lives. Show up for practice, eat properly, be healthy. But he would tell us in Japan and Korea, if the athletes played badly, the captain would have to punish them, and the team would watch the coach punish the captain, which sometimes was slapping severely across the face half a dozen times, and the captain would then have to go punish the athletes. Cultures, of course, are very different, but I think the power given a coach, and the higher up you go, the more power that coach has, is unchecked. I mean, we're starting to see some accountability in soccer and hockey, but only because they were blatantly exposed for incredible abuses of moral and physical authority.
And what was it like? I think it was 29 when you're the first woman to coach at this level. Did you feel a resentment on that? Did you feel like men were going, how dare you come into our world? That's the male domain. Or did you have people that were thrilled?
Many people were thrilled. I got more positive feedback after I was fired when I started a women's coaching school. And we trained over 300 women. And what we were training on was an athlete-centered model, how you keep the athlete at the center. But I'll tell you one funny anecdote that absolutely is classic. I had a young man who was my assistant for part of that first year. We would meet with the coaches meetings at the beginning of international tournaments. And at one point in Bulgaria, or one of those Eastern Bloc countries, we go into the room. I'm 29 or 28 and he's probably about 24. First, they assume he's the head coach. Second, I'm the only woman in the room. Third, virtually 80% of the men look like they work for some secret service. They're in tweed jackets, brogues, flannel pants, and ties. You couldn't kind of, which one of these people is not like the other? You couldn't have stood out more. So it wasn't that people were resentful or happy or unhappy. I think the athletes were happy to have a coach that understood what it was like to come through playing. But the coaches just kind of ignored me. And you could see that I didn't fit the club, which, to be honest, after I was fired, one of those ex-athletes, one that was very keen on the new coach, who was the fellow that broke the plaster in the motel room, he could get us better opportunities. Absolutely he could, because people paid attention to him. Change doesn't happen where people just open the doors. You kind of have to kick them down.
Do you think the guy that punches the wall and eventually becomes the coach, was he looking for a reason to take you out? I mean, I have to believe that your sexuality couldn't have been that much of a secret.
You wouldn't think so. And I wouldn't have thought so either. But apparently it was. And I know that we were terrified about being outed in those days. Because remember, it was only 1969. It was illegal to be homosexual. And when I was fired in 1982, there was nowhere across Canada except Quebec that had any protection. And it wasn't until 1996 that the federal government put it in their human rights protections. So people today can be quite casual about it, that, it's not a big deal. And young people especially, they're pretty casual. But they don't realize that people were terrified. And they were terrified because they represent over 70,000 people that were kicked out of the civil service, the RCMP, and the armed forces for being gay. And that's the decades we're talking about.
I'm flabbergasted that people would think that you were less capable. You had coaches that were abusing their athletes, and that was considered norm.
Yeah.
And yet your sexuality somehow had to be a handicap.
If you don't experience, sometimes it's hard to believe it happened. But I can tell you, after I was fired, I made the choice. You had to choose. I was either going to bury myself or be out. And when I was out, I did quite a lot of media. And often I'd be on call-in, like talk shows, call-in shows. And for the first 6-8 months, I'm telling you, every single call-in, somebody would ask about bestiality. Because of course, if you were a pervert, which is what homosexuals were, you must be a pervert in every way. A lot of people can't believe that there'd be that kind of public ignorance, but there was.
When we come back, Betty Baxter talks about how she was pushed beyond what most people could bear. But instead of letting that define her, she used it to find her voice, fight for others, and prove that we are often stronger than we know. I will then bring in 2 other voices, Eric Turner and Isidore Chung. They'll both talk about why belonging matters, and how it's often the emotional glue that not only binds humanity together, but corporate cultures. My hope is that Chatter That Matters opens up your eyes the way it opens up mine. I learned firsthand in my conversation with Betty Baxter that pride's not a flag-waving ceremony or a parade that happens once a year. Pride began as courage, as risk, as people standing up when standing out could cost them their job, their reputation, their safety, and their future. And that's why RBC's support of Pride matters, and why I'm so proud to be associated with this bank. RBC honors Pride through year-round action, supporting more than 75 LGBTQ+ community partners. They show up at more than 40 Pride parades around the world. They sponsor more than 13 queer film festivals. They're active with organizations like Pride at Work Canada and the Canadian LGBT+ Chamber of Commerce. And in 2025, RBC's board of directors approved its Inclusive Opportunities Blueprint as part of a broader commitment to help create more inclusive opportunities for employees, clients, and communities. And why this matters? Because diversity, inclusion, and belonging are not slogans. They're about whether people can walk into a room as their full selves and still be seen for their talent, their contributions, their character, and their humanity. Betty Baxter was denied that. Today, too many people are denied that. Pride reminds us that we can do better, because when more people belong, more people thrive. And when more people thrive, our communities prosper. Diversity and inclusion, well, that matters to you, to me, and to RBC.
It was considered you comply, you dress properly, you pay attention to your superiors, you listen to your coach, or you're out of here. And that's how sport works.
Betty Baxter, an elite athlete, an Olympic captain, a pioneering coach, a woman who gave so much to Canadian sport and that had so much taken from her because she was different from the people who held the power to judge. The silver lining in that meeting in that motel room and being fired and being dismissed, and I can only imagine how that sent you in a spiral, but you turned it to the advantage of others. You became an activist. As opposed to just sort of quietly going away, you must have become their nightmare because you started to raise these issues.
I was quite shocked in 21, it was actually fall of 20, when the BC Volleyball Association contacted me about being a candidate for their Hall of Fame, because I had had no contact with volleyball for at least 3 or 4 decades. I did a little bit in my activism. I was spending some time on the board of the BC Volleyball Association, but I couldn't have any impact. It was a really tight-knit old boys group. So I left volleyball, but I have had no contact with the Canadian Volleyball Association. Zero. Not a word from them in the press or anywhere else since 1982. There's no reference to me as a coach or very little to our team and our achievements. So you could say that's just history. It's too long ago. But I think by design, I am persona non grata. It'll be interesting if there's any response to this book by volleyball. I doubt that there will be.
Well, I'm sure they're trying to bury it because of embarrassment, but they should be celebrating the fact that in spite of all of this, what you accomplished as a coach, in terms of you looking at your life, where do you think your high marks are? I mean, this is a kid in Vancouver that didn't stand a chance. You made the team, you became the first woman coach. I mean, you had a lot of highlights early in your highlight reel, but would you, as you're reflecting on your life in the book, I sense there's a lot more pride, what you accomplished because of what happened to you.
Absolutely. Like, I have no doubt that I would have loved coaching and I would have had a good experience coaching because I was kind of hardwired for it. But in some ways, being fired and thrown out of sport was the best thing that ever happened to me because I learned about human rights and how collective action can make a difference in people's workplaces, their lives, their communities. And I learned the power of community, creating a community of women's coaches, creating the gay games. I have to say, in terms of an activism experience, the gay games in Vancouver can't be matched because it blew all the doors open everywhere. And the city responded with incredible care, love and care. That is a highlight. Now, teaching people in their workplaces that it's not okay to put other people down and, the consequences will come back to them. And they can make that decision to continue to be on the offside or not. So to facilitate people who are in conflict and have them come to a point of agreement where they can get behind a new program or policy, that I love that. It's kind of like coaching. And the more intense the issue or the more high stakes, the better it is. So I think it was a gift to be fired and be able to work on a broader basis.
What's your hope for the people that read this book? I mean, let's start with, do you hope volleyball reaches out to you and offers you an olive branch or a bridge saying, we need to learn from what we did as opposed to bury so that people forget?
Not at all. In fact, I think the book is far beyond being about volleyball. I mean, it's about sport. What I hope is parents and coaches will read the book and see that if you want the tremendous good that can be had from sport, and I really want to emphasize that sport helps women find power and authority in their bodies, and that is a sense of self that you can't get in many other activities. I mean, maybe hiking or other physical activities, but women are so encouraged to minimize the power of their bodies and to not take tons of space. So if parents and coaches want to help their daughters understand the power and the joy in their bodies, they need to know of all the parts of sport, and that, complaining about transgender being in sport or complaining about unfair coaches, that's not going to help shift it. What helps is get involved, pay attention, and pay attention to the coach. It's not whether the coach plays your kid or not. It's, is your coach an honorable person helping those kids? Or are they playing favorites? Or are they doing not enough time or too much time with some athletes? So I would hope that awareness around some of the nutrition issues, the power issues, especially the coaching training issues, the need for a system that is accountable right across the country. I would hope those would be the impact of the book. And I would hope that the government has the courage to stop this system and set up a new one, because this one is so deep with virtually kind of hereditary corruption. The people have had to come up through a power system that rewards those that keep the power system.
What about the parents? How often do you feel parents turn a blind eye? They know things aren't quite right, but they just have their burning ambition, to see their kid as the next superstar. They ignore that intuition.
I think it's more common than we'd like. And I think the problem is that most parents are thinking about their kid as the next superstar instead of thinking about how to help their kid invest in something that they'll love for their whole life. The superstar stuff, I listened to your podcast about sports betting and the corruption and organized crime in sports betting, and I found it incredibly powerful. At the superstar level, there is so much corruption. I think people should pause and wonder, do they really want their kid to be that top tennis player or that top soccer player? Because the sacrifice for the athlete is huge, and the benefit opens them up to so much cheating and corruption. So until we have a safer system, I think parents need to realize, not every kid's going to make it. And the $400 hockey stick or the $5,000 outfit is not going to do it if that kid doesn't have a whole community behind them and have the values that help them make the right choices.
I loved your book. I'm going to obviously put it in the podcast notes and encourage people to read it. And I related to you, and I don't want you to take this wrong, but first and foremost, as a father, saw that kid going to Vancouver and trying to figure stuff out, this burning drive and ambition that you found, even though I'd imagine a small town, that was way beyond what most people were thinking about where they wanted to go with life. I celebrated the wins, the gay games that you had, the activism, but felt so desperately for you when all you really wanted to do was continue to be an exceptional coach. That you had the players, they loved you, you were winning, you were doing everything that you've fought the rest of your life against, all the abuse and power. A coach for the athletes versus an emperor. And the thing that I really take away from this, and this is something for all parents, sports can offer such tremendous good, especially with women. I love what you said, give the power and authority from their bodies, a sense of self they can't get elsewhere. It's about the love of sports and the joy of sports and the playing of sports versus how far can I go in that sport.
An American poet named Adrienne Rich did a commencement address for I think it was Wellesley College, one of the elite, women colleges in the States. And she said the most affirming thing that can happen to you is to be pushed beyond your limits so that you learn that you can go beyond your limits. And I think that's what happened to me. I was pushed beyond what would be expected, and I learned how to figure it out and keep going. And if I can even have one or two people pick that up from the book.
For all that more, I really appreciate you joining me on Chatter That Matters. As I said earlier in the show, I had an opportunity to host a video showcasing RBC's commitment to the Inside Out Queer Film Festival, a partnership that now extends more than 18 years. And to learn more, I sat down with Eric Turner, the Regional Vice President, Commercial Banking at RBC, and Isidore Chung, Director of Field Support. I asked Eric, why has RBC supported Inside Out for 18 years? Why does it matter so much to the bank and to the bank's employees?
I think what's wonderful about the Inside Out partnership, we have evolved. We came in as a sponsor and, I feel like we're a true partner at this particular point in time. And so, we've moved beyond the festival itself, like just the festival, which of course is wonderful and very impactful. But, we've really moved into that year-round support, resources for youth, educators, dedicated awards, and the programs for emerging talent. It feels real and purposeful. Sponsorships like these are more important now than they've ever been.
What does representation through a festival mean?
We were part of the sponsorship when it probably wasn't the thing to do in terms of from a corporate perspective. And 18 years ago was a very different time and a very different mindset. And the organization has been so passionate about this sponsorship, given that it is the right thing to do and underrepresented voices matter in such a big way. And having a queer perspective as part of a sponsorship truly illustrates our commitment to respect and diversity.
Eric, what does pride mean to you personally?
I've spent most of my working career, or all of my working career really, at RBC because I feel like I truly belong. I don't think my experience is unique. I think that is what we are trying to do as an organization, giving people the ability to bring their whole selves to work. And through a sponsorship like Inside Out, being part of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, I think it's the values and practice. I feel it each and every day.
What I learned from speaking to Eric is that pride matters because representation matters, belonging matters, and respect has to be more than words on a page. Let's move to my conversation with Isidore Chung, Director of Field Support at RBC. Isidore, you spoke at Inside Out in 2025, and I heard there was both tears and applause. So tell me a little bit about what you had to say.
I spoke from the heart. It was a tumultuous year for the 2S LGBTQ plus community in general. So sharing a little bit of insight of where I fit into the grand scheme of things and what we do to continue to drive those values forward, I think that's probably what resonated with the crowd. I got a really big applause, so I'm thrilled about that. Plus, I used the opportunity to score some points with my partner of many years, and share that we'd recently gotten married. So that got an even bigger applause.
At a time when some organizations are moving away from diversity and inclusion, why is RBC leaning in?
I look at respect being kind of the foundation of those core values like empathy, equity, inclusion, trust, and just basic humility for human beings. I look at respect as kind of the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it kind of is the basis of how we treat everyone around us. It's kind of the basis of what inclusion means in the workplace. It doesn't differentiate where you're from, who you are, your economic position, your choice to be who you want to be. And that's, I think, what's going to be key to our success as an organization. RBC leading into relationships and helping to make those decisions for us faster as well.
So what does that look like in real life, not just policy?
The differentiator is a very, very simple 3-letter acronym. Listen, know, care. I think that's what's being done differently within RBC, and that's going to make us much more stronger as an organization in the future as well. Because if you listen, take a moment to listen to the folks around you, your peers, your colleagues, your friends. It really provides you so much context, so much information, and you really build trust in a relationship. Know, if you listen, you'll then know how to maybe approach a situation or circumstance, provide solutions and care. By listening and knowing and helping, you show that you care for those around you. So I think that's what's the differentiator in market.
I heard that one of the reasons you've stayed with RBC so long is that you get to use your voice. Tell me about that.
The people I work with give me joy and happiness and really help me to thrive and lift me up. And just the opportunity, the sheer access and opportunity you have with such a brand recognition in market being able to go out in the community and help to amplify the voices of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, for example, that's brought me a new level of joy and appreciation for an organization like RBC. Last year, we were able to participate in almost 30 what we call community activation events, raised over $45,000 for various organizations, charities in the 2S LGBTQ plus community and beyond. So having that reach and that ability and that impact, but that's also brought me personal joy and personal accomplishment as well.
As we celebrate Pride across Canada, let's remember, at its best, it's not about a logo or a month or a statement. It's about respect and action, helping people feel safe, feel seen, and feel that they belong. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening to Chatter That Matters. Let's chat soon.